Welcome to Doctors of the Baobab. On this podcast, we go beyond the white coat to get to know the doctors that we admire and respect. Join us as we explore the stories behind the stethoscopes, uncovering the humanity behind the medical expertise. Whether it's navigating the complexities of patient care, overcoming personal obstacles, or advocating for change in the healthcare system, each episode promises to inspire, to educate, and to uplift. So sit back, relax, and prepare to embark on a journey of self-discovery with Doctors of the Baobab. And in today's episode, it gives me great pleasure to introduce and to welcome Dr. Maryann Mugo, a proud daughter of Kenya, now based in the United States of America. She's an endocrinologist with more than 18 years of experience in diverse healthcare settings. With a solid educational background and a medical degree from the University of Nairobi and extensive career experience, she demonstrates proficiency in managing various endocrine conditions. Notable achievements include starting an endocrinology clinic, fostering diabetes programs, and also achieving accreditations. For example, Dr. Mugo initiated the inaugural endocrinology clinic in the Tri-Lakes region, catering to multiple counties in southwest Missouri and north central Arkansas. Her efforts led to the clinic becoming the first clinic in Missouri to attain the JCO accreditation for inpatient diabetes care. Her teaching experience and numerous publications, I think I've counted over 40 publications, reflect a commitment not only to education, medical education, but also to advancing medical knowledge. Additionally, she's involved in numerous projects, committees, has multiple professional affiliations, and many service projects, which underscore a dedication to improving healthcare delivery, particularly in the field of endocrinology. Dr. Maryann Mugo, welcome to Doctors of the Baobab.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nondumiso. I'm very honored to be here with you this afternoon.
Great. And I'm so proud and excited to have you as somebody who is such an esteemed endocrinologist. I believe you're the first endocrinologist that I've interviewed for this podcast. But I wanted to start, as we always do on this podcast, with your history in Kenya, asking you the very first time that you considered being a doctor. When did that happen? At what point in I'm assuming your childhood, but at what point did that happen for you?
Well, to my recollection, it happened in high school. I know there was this book that was in the library, and it was an anatomical book. And for some reason, it landed in my hands. And I started reading it, and all these Latin names were fascinating to me. Obviously, at that point, I'd already kind of developed an interest in science. So, and I had an interest in trying everything. I used to be one of those people who, if there was a new club, I'm in. If there's a new class, I'm in. And so anything that was new and mysterious was interesting and intriguing to me. So I started reading this book, and I was so fascinated by all the different anatomical aspects. I think for me, that was the beginning. I knew, as most of us who have grown up in Kenya know, most of your parents are always asking you to be a doctor, dentist, engineer, or something. So I was like, well, this kind of fits into what my future career could be. Plus, it looks very interesting. So I would say somewhere in high school, I don't think I ever saw myself as a doctor before around age 16. I wasn't that kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. I'll admit.
Yes. Okay. Thank you so much. And you're quite right, Doc. You know, I think for a lot of us in coming from Africa, we don't also have a lot of options. So, but I wanted to just also check with you if there was any other influence. We know that often, it's not only our decision when we decide to become doctors. Maybe the parents are also invested,
Mm-hmm.
or we have a teacher, or even an experience where we see another doctor who looks like us and we get inspired. Would that be something that you can relate to?
Oh yeah. I I remember watching on TV. There used to be several doctor shows on TV, and usually they were men, but I remember there was one particular one. She was a rural doctor somewhere in rural USA. I don't remember her name, but she used to miraculously fix people. And I thought that was actually very interesting how she could do that. And how the fact that she was such a caring person made it, made her work affect so many people in the community that it changed things and decisions in the community. I can also say I had people that we used to go and see. You go see doctors, you see dentists at some point, and you really, intrigued by what they're doing. How come they know what's wrong with you? How do they know? What is it that's special about them? And so you kind of want to know what is the background of how they got that knowledgeable, and to the point where they can actually help you. What I can say is in our family, there wasn't really any physician or healthcare person that I recall as a child, but a lot of them were the people we went to see as kids in the clinics. And, some of them you'd ask them questions, they'd give you answers, and then they would say, oh, maybe you can be a doctor one day. But of course, that was just talking to you as a child. You never really saw yourself in that position. It's more just conversational. But then later on is when you start to see, okay, if you get into certain classes, you can do some classes that can put you on the path for that. For example, I think one of the things my parents did for me was in high school you had to pick between art subjects and science subjects, and I really liked the arts and I loved history and all that, and but I could probably do as well in science. And I remember I selected all my subjects and I brought it home, and my dad looked at it and said, here's what you're doing. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I can do both. But he kind of steered me in the science direction. And I always look back and say that was the best thing he did for me, because at that point, I didn't have the insight to understand that, okay, maybe you have more options in science. So this was like Form 2, the second year of high school. So by that time, you're still just a kid. You just do things that you enjoy and don't do things that you don't enjoy. End of story. And that's, I would say, a big turning point for me. So once you're already on that path, now you start to see yourself as you grow and evolve, you start to see yourself being able to get to that point where those doctors we saw in our childhood had gotten to. So that's kind of, yeah,
Yeah.
those are the maybe the influence that were in my journey.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and you talk then about getting to medical school with those types of influences, and of course, something that we know is that medical school is not very easy. It's not. It's quite a difficult journey, particularly if get into medical school not because you want to be there,
Yeah.
you know. So when you arrive at medical school, was there any, were you at any point thinking about maybe I really don't want to do this? Maybe this is actually my parents should come and finish this degree for me because it can be so challenging. Did you ever experience that at any point that you are maybe not as invested, or did the love of medicine grow as you were in medical school?
Well, to be honest, I think by the time I got to medical school, I was sold on the idea because I could see the path that it's going to put me on and that I can do stuff to help people. One of the biggest challenges I had was when we joined our class, there was probably 10% girls, 90% boys. And so I had gone to an all girls school. So it was very hard in your school, maybe one of the top students, and naturally, I think girls were not very competitive. Like we never used to compete and all, but I found that in this class, there are some really smart people and a lot of people that I had never encountered that level of intellect and ability. and also sort of competition, Plus, they were working harder. Like, I know in high school, there were some things where I could say I used to wing it, where you just somehow you could learn, you could wait till the last minute study and still do well. You get to med school, that's not an option. And there were people who in med school, they could do that. And I was so fascinated by how some people could recite these massive textbooks. And you'd be like, how did you? It took me hours to study that few pages, and you're reciting the whole thing. So we had a whole spectrum of people, and I wasn't used to that. So that was one of the challenges, is just accepting that, okay, everybody's going to go at their own pace. Just make sure you pass. Make sure you pass and learn what you need to do to take care of people in the future. And so I would say that getting into the first year was an adjustment in that sense. And then just being more, I had to ask. Sometimes you had to ask for help. They provided teaching assistants, which in high school you don't have that. You study among yourselves. So the good thing is it was almost scheduled. So you knew, okay, there's going to be a teaching assistant at your anatomy table. Just make sure you speak up. So learning to speak up and ask the question and not worry about looking dumb, that was the hard part. But I'll say school was very exciting. I would say for me, it was really exciting. I enjoyed all these, that anatomy at first scene. I get into the class and I'm like, it's here, it's real. They were trying to start out, okay, am I gonna, it's like somehow got into it and you started doing what you're supposed to. Then exams, like, what? You mean I can actually fail? Like, how? Luckily, we had ways of, we had that, and so it was a very environment, I would say. At least there was some, one of the things I had is that they tried to give us opportunities to study. We had study groups, and then we had the teaching assistants, and then we had so many sessions of training. It's actually the time that you didn't have. You had to recognize too that as a medical student, you had to choose not to have a social life to some extent, and that was a sacrifice. Sometimes you'd still find a way to get in, especially like after you're done with exams. Now you catch up on all the missed opportunities. Some of our friends who are not in med school would be having fun the whole semester, and then you just catching up at the end. But it was worth it. I have no regrets because at least I got a little bit of both. Yeah.
Yeah. So you touched on something quite important, that one that often gets highlighted when we talk about the life of medical doctors and some of the challenges that we might experience, that sort of crops up in medical school. As you've mentioned, you get to medical school and you find that there's so many more of high achievers, and that can bring feelings sometimes of self-doubt. I'm sure in Kenya, as in South Africa and other parts of the world, there is a culture in medical school that is quite exacting, that doesn't necessarily blow your ego that you had when you you were the top achiever in your school. So that sort of sometimes carries beyond medical school. Have you ever experienced that, or how have you overcome that imposter syndrome that a lot of doctors sometimes say they have?
Oh yeah, definitely. I would say imposter syndrome is a given. Everybody has it, just maybe to different extents. The the way I experienced it was actually more when I came to the US, because the training, so our training in Kenya is very hands-on, right? And I'll say, yes, we had a lot of hands-on experience, but we didn't, the literature part, like being able to recite study in 2002, the UK PDS, blah, 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 being able to recite that and knowing all the references, we didn't have a lot of access to literature. So, and books. We had maybe one or two textbooks. So you come here and the first session you attend and people are listing, oh yeah, in Harrison they say this and that and that. Like, I don't even have Harrison's, but I can definitely put an IV. I can put a central line in that kid. So one of the things I had to accept is that, okay, my training, my foundation was more practical. So now I had to build on the academic or the learning or literature part of it. And I remember I asked one of the attending when I was a first year, I was an intern here, and I went to him and I said, geez, I feel so like I don't have all the literature at my fingertips. And I said, what should I do? And he said, go read books. That's what you do. And I was like, well, there's so many. I've never had this many books to choose from. Which one should I read? And the best answer he gave me, he's like, the one that you will read. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you read it. And I was like, that's so smart. So I picked one. It was Harrison's at the time. I got Harrison's, was thick. And he said, just make sure you read every page, every topic we do, go to Harrison's, read every section of it. And so it's like I was able to overcome that feeling when people are sitting in a class. We used to do rounds and we discuss case discussion. Now I could recite all the tests. They would say, which is the first test? List 20 differentials. And then what test will you do? And some of the tests that they were listing in the books, I had never seen. Or we only used to talk about them in theory. And so now, if you say you're going to order it, you order the test on the patient. So moving from that point of feeling like, really, I can't fit in this place. I don't have enough background knowledge, to where now you can recite everything that they're asking for and actually know what it is, not just guessing. So to me, one way to I've learned over the years to overcome imposter is try to see what it is, try to discern what exactly is it that you feel you're deficient in, because it's not everything. You have some things that you're good at and some things you're not. So once you figure that out, then try to see if there's someone who can help you with that. If you find that person, that's great. But the next thing is, if they give you advice, take it and run with it, because that's another thing. I see this with diabetics all the time. Two diabetics, you give them the same advice. One will do what you tell them and one will not. And the success will show in the one who did what you told them. So usually you have to follow those steps, and then you encounter imposter. Each level you go, there is imposter. Because now once you become a clinician, now you're thinking, okay, these other consultants are better than me. I don't know how. I don't want to be called. Don't call me. Don't call me when it's my call with these complex cases. Call so and so. Yeah. So it's at every level.
Yeah. And great advice there, suggestions about really working on your craft, right? Honing your craft and building your confidence around your expertise. And also working with people, taking suggestions from people. So a couple of issues that I wanted to sort of pull out from that story. One is around how you made the decision to come to the US and your experience in the transition. And the second piece is around the role of mentorship in our field, how you have experienced it and if at all you have extended it. But let's start with the first piece, which is around your transition. What happened after you completed medical school that made you decide that, okay, I think I want to try my, to ply my trades in another country?
So the interesting thing is this is where friends come in, because after we finished internship, a group of us went to work in Nairobi Hospital, which is a private hospital, and we were working in the casualty department. And in that casualty department, it was very good for us because we were young, impressionable, and we had a lot of energy. And there was a lot of new stuff coming in medicine, especially in accident and emergency medicine. And I remember there was this team that came from the US. They were teaching us resuscitation. And one thing I observed about them is that they had a system. Like, they would all come in, different instructors would teach the exact same thing. Then you had to get tested on competence. And I remember thinking, wow, this is a very good way to practice things. And then we started talking among ourselves, and we were like, I wonder how it would be to go and actually practice there. Because at that point, we were after med school trying to decide, are we going to do Master of Medicine in Nairobi? Are we going to do it elsewhere? And there were several people who wanted to go to the UK. So we did our research as a group, and we decided, you know what, it looks like US has the easiest path. Not easy, but easier than the UK. And so we decided, we found out what needs to happen, which was do the USMLE get a residency program, and then at least get trained. You may come back or you could stay. And so initially, when we left, our plan was to go get training, become specialists, and then come back to Kenya. We used to sit together, we studied together, we did all our applications together. Sometimes we even shared places. We went to stay together and study when we came to the US. So it was really kind of a group effort. And some of those colleagues are still my close friends. We talk about our experiences all along, still kind of inspire and encourage each other. So that part I can say we all had the same idea. Like we wanted to expand our horizons. I can say that for a fact because we were at that age where you have options. I don't have to take what's in front of me. I can actually broaden my horizons, and that's what we chose to do.
And so which is a nice segue to the second part of my question, which is around mentorship and influences, something that I know is very important during our medical education that really keeps us going. Can you share some examples of how mentorship in your profession or even personally has assisted you, and just your general thoughts about mentorship, and where you've also been a mentor?
Very interesting. I would say I honestly did not know how to incorporate mentors into my life because, as you know, in African, or let me say Kenyan medical schools at the time, attendings were at this level, or what we call professors consultants, and we were down here. It was once they teach you, that was like the end of the relationship. So even when I came here, I remember one of the first things our professor, our program director, one time he pulled me aside. He said, "Maryann, you need to speak up. I want you to talk. Come and ask me questions. Ask me whatever you want. Tell me what you want to do." And I was like, I'm not used to asking people what I should do because you either had to figure it out or you ask your friends. So I'll say probably the first influence was my peers. After joining here, I realized, okay, they actually assign you an attending who's kind of in charge of you. They check in with you. And so their biggest role was to make sure you're keeping up academically and with all the requirements. But you soon realize there are some who actually care. So one of the things I learned is you have to also ask the mentor because sometimes they want to ask, but they're afraid to intrude in your life. They don't want to give unsolicited advice. So sometimes they're just waiting for you to ask, hey, what should I do about this? So I remember when it came time to approaching the end of residency and trying to decide what do I do next. I had asked our program director, who was also an endocrinologist, I said, what do you think? How do you think about endo? What should I do? And he's the one who gave me the breakdown, and he's like, just talk to this person, go here, do this. He gave me a whole breakdown of what to do. And we became so close. I was like his right-hand woman because he'd give me assignments. I would start taking care of his patients. And that to me was like the first kind of real mentor I had. But then he's a man. So I didn't realize that for guys it's different. I'll say for me, I've learned ask women as well because everybody's journey is different. I've had to be a mother and a wife while I was a resident. The guys, they won't be able to share that experience. And so there were some other residents who had gone through that process, so I was able to ask them, but it wasn't something natural. Asking for help, a lot of us doctors I know, we don't know how to ask for help, myself included. I've learned over the years. Now I do, everywhere I go, when I teach residents, I always tell them, come and talk to me, not only about career, but also ask me about life, because there's some things I can tell you that the guys will not tell you. And I'm not being biased or anything here.
No, that's your lived experience, which I think is shared by many people. The so-called work-life balance or work-life integration or life-work balance, as people call it. So maybe you can share some strategies of how you've managed to prevent stress and burnout, because that is essentially the end point, right, of not being able to manage these different domains of life. And particularly for us as doctors, because for some doctors, to a large extent, the work becomes their life. We spend so much time in the hospital with the patients, and it can be all consuming. to the point where we neglect certain aspects of life as well.
Mm-hmm.
What are the strategies that you have that have worked for you that maybe somebody else might consider, or those that you share with people that ask you for advice about managing these domains in your life?
What I'll say, the first thing, make sure you choose a life partner who is very supportive. I didn't realize how important that is, but my husband, he's very supportive. When it comes to, like, sometimes he'll look at me and say, "You're really stressed. I need you to go and do." He knows I like running, so go run. Just go for 30 minutes, go for an hour, and then come back. But it's really helpful because then he doesn't feel like I'm ignoring him or trying to take away family time, because it's something we discuss in that. So I'll give him, this is what I'm expected to do. These are the expectations and all that. And he's like, yeah, go do it. It's almost like if he gives me his blessing, I feel okay. So to me, that's the first part of overcoming burnout. Because the worst is when your expectations of what you need to give the other person don't match what you're actually giving. So you start to feel like you're selling out or something. But when he's like, I've given, just go do what you need to do, then that has really helped. But I also know I've come to accept that it's not my fault. I know the systems that we work in, sometimes they expect too much. It's always been a tradition. I think even when you go into medicine, the expectation is like going into the military. You go knowing you're going to feel pain, you could die. Medicine is the same. Like you go in, you're going to suffer, you're going to feel bad, and it could kill you indirectly. So you expect that. But then what you don't realize is you're also human. You're not necessarily built like that. Not everyone's built like that. So starting to see, okay, I don't have to feel guilty if I can't be there for every meeting, if I can't do every project that's expected. I can actually learn to say no. That's the hard thing. And then the other thing, like outside life, I always try to separate work and home. And the way I do that is try to not bring work home if I can. Of course, it's getting harder and harder. There's so much more work, but I try to do that if I can. If I can't, then I'll limit the time. Like I'll wait till everyone's gone to bed and then I do 1 hour. And I always say it's exactly 1 hour. Then I also set time for my own personal stuff, which is exercise and other things like that.
Yeah, yeah, very important, and I appreciate the topic that you're raising also around setting boundaries. So we often get labeled as doctors as people pleasers to some extent. We'll do anything for our patients, literally,
Yeah.
and for their welfare in any case. And so, again, the stress and the burnout, particularly we're particularly vulnerable to that. So during the course of your transition then to the US and adjusting to this new environment, new culture, new society, what did you discover about yourself that you weren't aware of before you came to the United States, before you started your residency program?
That's a tough one. That I wasn't aware of. I would say I always considered myself like a very social person because back home, I think I was involved in every social activity that I could find. But what I found is that it's hard when I meet a culture that's different, it's hard for me to like dive in. So my approach is to just kind of stay on the outside, which I think is what led to my program director saying, you need to speak up, because I felt like I don't fit in here. So rather than try to bring back my skills of socializing and all, I just chose to move aside and just be separate. And the downside of that is in this culture, you're actually rewarded the louder you are. Like people need to hear. You have to scream answer. Like if they ask questions, you be the one to scream the answer. If you wait to be asked, no one will ever ask you. So I didn't understand that about myself. So, over the years, now I'm learning, okay, maybe I don't have to scream the answer first, but always give your input, give what your thoughts are, and try to think carefully about what your thoughts are before you give it, because when you're a Black woman and with an accent, that's another thing. People, when they hear your accent, sometimes they don't listen. They just shut this, they change their reception of what you're saying. So make sure what you say is very solid and sound. And then it's easier for people, even if you're not speaking as much, then they'll listen to you. So I had to learn that about myself, that I'm naturally not a social person. I think it was just easy because I was with my people.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think a very important topic that you're raising there, sometimes as Black women in different societies, and sometimes even in Africa, back home, where a lot of people look like you may very well find yourself being the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
And often the feedback is that you feel saddled with the burden of thinking you have to represent every other Black woman or every other Black person in the organization. So when you speak, you are much more measured.
True.
Because you want to or you don't want to feed into a stereotype.
Yeah.
Has that been an experience for you, and how did you ensure that you show up as your authentic self as a Black woman, as an African woman, where you are the minority?
Yeah, that's the challenge, is to try and, it's like code switching. So sometimes I found that if I'm 100% myself, it doesn't always land well with my audience. I remember one time when my daughter was second grade, and I was called to the school and I was told, "Oh, just come and read the kids a story." And I was reading them a very African story with a lot of sounds and African words and all that. And I was like, the kids had looked. My daughter was like, "Mom, those kids didn't even know what you were saying," because I thought I want to be as authentic. So what I've learned is there's a time, be yourself, but there are times to like enhance, amplify. Then there are times to just show a little bit of it, just enough. But I think naturally, I'm one of those people, it takes too much energy to be other than. So I try to be as natural as possible, even sometimes to the extent where they're like, you can do better. You can say more, do more, but that's just not me. So I'm okay with just giving the core of who I am, and what I'm offering is, the one that comes natural to me. And then if I have to add layers, so I would say it's not that hard, especially the longer you've been here, you start to understand. Like you look for your allies. So there are people in the system, like if I'm talking to administrators, there are certain ones I know I can really be myself. I'll tell them, look, I'm not doing this, or this is how we're going to do it. There are others where I'm going to be more measured, because I don't think they have yet seen that other side or authentic side of me. But I think most people who are immigrants in professions here, you kind of oscillate between two worlds, yourself, and then there's the self that the world here wants to see. And then sometimes you blend it, but mostly it's either or. Yeah.
Which takes a great deal of self-awareness, right?
Oh yeah.
To be able to do that, and hopefully in time we move to a place where we don't have to, be mindful of such issues, because it takes a lot of energy.
It does.
As well
And
from you, to show up as a different person, or a different way of expressing yourself, so that you are more comfortable and other people are more comfortable, actually, because it's more about other people
true.
feeling more comfortable.
True.
But my sense is that this did not impact your medical practice, and as far as patients were concerned. It seems from that perspective, your interactions with patients are much more comfortable. Would that be correct?
So there's a very interesting phenomenon I've observed. Because what we do is very niche, when by the time people are coming to see us, they already have something serious diagnosed. So it's very rare that people will look at you as other than the endocrinologist. Then behind that is when they'll see Maryann, the African woman who has this, who came from Kenya, who's an immigrant, whatever. So we are lucky in that. I'll say I'm fortunate in that sense that I have that space where when you come in, we're dealing with this one issue. What I have found is when I'm outside of that environment, now it's different. I'm just another Black woman on the street. So that's when I have to be more careful about how I present myself and how people perceive me, because there are times you walk into a place, every person will tell you, you see people following you and they're like, why are you following? I'm in a store, but I'm a Black woman. So they have all these stereotypes. So, but in the profession, luckily, among patients, their curiosity usually it's high at first, but then once they understand that you're going to solve their problem, they don't go down that path anymore. More recently, there's been a few patients who ask you, which country did you come from and when are you going back? But that's nothing. I don't take that as anything, because some of them just are curious. I've had patients who, I think just in general, they're more interested in knowing about your background out of a genuine interest than anything else. In the profession, like same situation, like if you go to a meeting, you can't, you have to make sure that you're careful about what you say. That's just the reality. It hasn't affected me as much, again, because what I do is very niche. So then if I bring an opinion, always it's going to be related to what I'm doing. So not many people will be in that room that can say something different about it unless it's non-clinical. And so I'm usually safe in that environment. When it's non-clinical stuff, I generally defer to other people because I'm a clinician. I don't do administrative stuff. Yes. So I'll say clinical. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the clinician part of me is my armor. That's what I lead with, so that I don't have to deal with some of the other stuff.
The rest of it behind the white coat, as it were.
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Well, this is an opportunity now on the podcast to dig into that behind the white coat and to really get to know and to understand you more. Something that I'd love to talk a bit more about is your clinical practice and your endocrinology practice. You mentioned that you got started because, in part, I assume, because you had a mentor, you did your research about it, and you landed in endocrinology. What has your journey been like in endocrinology?
Mm-hmm. The good thing is endocrinology is very clinical. The lifestyle first was one of the things that made me want to be interested in it, because you don't do a lot of night call. You don't have to run to the hospital at night. But it's a very, how do I say, intellectual subject, because a lot of the time you're trying to decipher puzzles. And one of the things I remember in residency, the endocrine cases are always the most interesting, because you had to explain to the attending in detail why this has happened, what was secondary to what, secondary to what, secondary. So when you can see a clear path of all the etiology, and then there's always this feedback loop. So everything is a system. So it made a lot of sense. You didn't feel like you had to memorize a lot of stuff. It just made sense, right? So once I decided that's what I want to pursue, again, the program director kind of gave me guidance on how to apply. We had done some research on HIV patients who had lipodystrophy syndrome. So that's what I used as my application research. And then I got into a very nice program in Missouri, which was, it was a university, but they had all the levels from medical students, residents, fellows, and then they're attending. So we had a whole team, and some of my closest friends, I made them there. That was a 2-year program, 100% clinical. We did some research. I got into research. That's actually where most of my papers came from, because we had an attending. He was a very well-known endocrinologist. He had done a lot of research in hypertension, renin-angiotensin, aldosterone syndrome system. And so he recruited. He'd just come and say, we're writing a paper. Then he'd give you a stack of papers and say, go review this. That was before all these reference manager, EndNotes, or Tero and all. He'll just give you a stack of papers, and I'd spend weekends reading and summarizing and then writing. And then he would be the final author and you'd be the first author. So you get some cred and he gets cred. So, but it was so good because he was a very good mentor. He'd be like, I want you to do this. I want you to be thinking about things. And he took us, he'd invite us for conferences where we would be the presenter. And it's like a national conference. You say, you're going to present on the work we did for this drug or this particular step in the process. And I remember thinking one time, I was like, that was imposter. I was like, I do not deserve to be here. Because he sent a check. He's like, I'm sending you money to travel. You're going to be at this hotel. You meet me there. And then you're presenting, but I'm going to be there. Oh my gosh, it was so terrifying. But that was one of the times when I felt this is somebody really putting you out there. And it was very exciting. I did that. And then at the same time, I got into there was a fellows program, the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists, and one of my co-residents was the fellow in training representative, and he's like, Maryann, I think you should do this. So sometimes it's not even a mentor, it's like a director. He says, you're doing this. And he was a second year, I was a first year. He's like, I think you should apply. And so I applied. What you do is you apply and then you give a spiel and then people vote for you. So I became the fellow in training representative for 1 year. The best part of that is I got to know so many different people. I met so many other fellows all over the country, would go for meetings. I also got in with the board of directors. So sometimes we'd be at the meeting, I'm the only fellow, and then they would all be there. They'd say, come and join us, come. And it was so nice. Again, my husband was very supportive because he's like, yeah, go, just do it. Sometimes I'll bring him. My daughter was only 3. And at that time, she went with me for many conferences. Sometimes I'll bring her with me and they're like, just bring her. We'll babysit. So they'll babysit while we're doing work, while we're presenting and doing things like that. And so it was a very good experience. After that, 2 years later, found myself the first job I had, they never had an endo before. So I remember when I was being recruited, they were like, do you think you can handle this? Or how do you feel about doing internal medicine? Because I was also certified in internal medicine. They were like, you can do internal or endo. I was like, I'm going to do endo. I'm going to be the one. And so we built a practice. Of course, it's a hospital supported practice. So, but they said, we're going to give you stuff. You just tell us what you need. If you need equipment, we'll just basically set it up. And that's what we did. And it became a very thriving practice. There for 8 years.
And you won some awards and recognition. Can you
In
tell us a bit
Johnson.
more about that? Yes.
Yeah, it was a lot to do with around 2010, 2011 is when inpatient medicine, inpatient diabetes care was still very much in its nascent stages. And I remember many patients in the hospital never used to get attention. Like people would diagnose diabetes, but it would be at the bottom of the list. And caring for the blood sugars was never really a big deal. So around that time was also when things like the Digami trial had come out, studies showing improvement and I think nice sugar, all these studies that were showing improved outcomes with inpatient glucose management. And the American Association of Clinical Endocrinologists was also at the same time creating guidelines on how to manage. We didn't have, people would go in the hospital and the sugars would be high the entire time, or they would be low and no one knew what to do. So it was really, I think, being at the right place at the right time. And so we just created a program where if this happens, we do this, if we do this. So we just rolled it out to the nurses on the floor, especially for hypoglycemia. And then we set up a system where the diabetes educator would get an automatic trigger if the patient's sugars were high in the hospital. Rather than waiting for a consult, it would go straight to them. So they would show up and immediately start implementing care, like talk to the hospitalist. See, as an endo, as the only one in the town. So sometimes I'm in clinic. I can't make it to the hospital till late at night. And so the educators were basically sort of sorting out which patients need urgent care, which ones do you need to see today, which ones do just need education, which ones just need outpatient care. So that's how we got that recognition, because we created that sort of initial program. I wouldn't say I did it alone. I had a lot of collaboration with the diabetes educators. Yeah, it was mostly the educators, the nursing team. The hospital is very grateful for it because then they got less calls. But yeah, that's how we got. So around that time, they nominated us for champions of healthcare, and yeah. So I think I was nominated twice.
Oh, well done for that.
Yeah.
So I think again, I want to move to something related to that, which is your legacy as a professional, but also in your personal life. Well, you've talked about your accolades, and you're very active in endocrinology. How would you to date sum up your legacy, and how would you want to build on that going into the future?
Wow. I like the way you use legacy because I feel like I really haven't done much. That's what I feel. I know everybody kind of goes through that. I would say I, I'm glad that I was an endocrinologist. I've been an endocrinologist during this time because there was a time when diabetics were ignored in the inpatient and outpatient setting. And we also have very good tools. So I'm a big advocate for making sure access. I like patients to get access. So one of my current goals is, like, I see a lot of minorities or marginalized patients who don't get offered things like continuous glucose monitors. This is just in my own practice. I've had patients come to me who have good insurance, but nobody ever thought of ever offering them CGMs and even pumps, insulin pumps. So yes, maybe it just doesn't cross their mind. Maybe the thinking is, oh, they're not going to follow. But one of my goals is to make sure all these people who may not, like, they may fall through the cracks, I want to make sure they get access to what they need to. I won't say I'm going to always be available because sometimes it's very hard to make yourself available for every single patient when in the kind of work we do, there's more patients than endos can ever cover. But I think going forward, I'm very interested in patient advocacy in the sense that a lot of corporations, a lot of hospitals now are big on, just take care of the patients, just run them through the system, see as many patients as you can. And I feel like patients' concerns are not always met. And it might be, I can address your sugar, but your real problem is you just don't know how to eat right. You don't know how to exercise right. But in our current setup, there is no role for me to talk about that because that's not paid for. Insurance doesn't pay for that. Insurance pays for me to measure your A1C, give you insulin or medications, and get you out the door. That's basically the case. So I want to get to a point where patients can more easily. Right now, you can get it, but you have to pay. You have to get they're referred to a diabetes educator if you want to learn about diet, and that's not for everyone. Some people just can't learn that way. They almost have to be, you have to take them to a kitchen and cook with them. So all these sort of community things, I think I would love to get involved in that. I haven't found one, but I'm looking.
Yeah. I'm sure you'll definitely find one. And as you've correctly identified, doctors are very well positioned to give back to the community, something that you mentioned very early on, that one of your inspirations was to see a doctor in a rural area serving the community where they were and meeting their needs in that way. Is there anything you want to talk about that we can add?
I honestly, I thought about what you're doing, the work you're doing with coaching, and I'm telling you, there's a very big need in the sense that when I talk to my colleagues, almost everyone is suffering moral injury, and not everyone
Yes.
knows how to, first of all, just to recognize it, and then how to
Yeah.
deal with it, and how to push back on the things that are triggering that that whole situation. Because most clinicians, we just want to take care of patients. Just leave me alone. Let me and my patient, I'll take care of that. If I don't have to
Yeah.
worry about the money, that would be the best. Of course, in a real world, you have to, but I would love for more of us to be sort of helped or assisted. Coaching is probably the right way to go because you're not going to take away the load. And I think therapy is great, but it's not directly applicable to what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's very important to have a physician coach. And but I think what you're doing is very pertinent. And I don't think only diaspora physicians need it. There's a lot of need. So there's enough people who need your
Yes.
services, really.
So, Doctor, how will people who want to collaborate with you or patients who want to work with you find you?
anyone who's interested can reach out to me on my LinkedIn, follow me on my LinkedIn profile or on social media. Yeah, that's probably the best way to get to me.
Okay. And we'll
Yeah.
also share the link of your social media in the show notes to make it easy for people to find you and to reach out to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Maryann Mugo, for your time. Really appreciate your immense insights. And I'm sure our audience will be much better for it. And that wraps up another insightful episode of Doctors of the Baobab. I hope you found today's discussion both enlightening and empowering. Before we part ways, I want to extend a heartfelt invitation to the audience. If you are a doctor who's been inspired by what you've heard today and you're ready to take action towards positive change in your life, you can consider working with me, your host, Dr. Nondo Stevenson, as a life coach. You can email me to learn more about my coaching services and how we can embark on a transformative journey together, where we can navigate the challenges, uncover your strengths, and also unlock your fullest potential. So don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so that you don't miss another episode filled with valuable insights and strategies for personal growth. Sharing is caring. So if you know someone who would also benefit from this conversation, be sure to spread the word and encourage them to tune in. Stay connected beyond the podcast. Follow us on our social media platforms. Join the conversation, share your thoughts, and connect with like-minded individuals who are also on their journey towards living their best life. Thanks again for tuning in. Doctors of the Baobab, where medicine meets motivation.